Hello, hello. Today we're going to be talking about 4 different civilizations. We're going to talk about the Hittites, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, and the Lydians. So before we get started on those, let me just give you a quick background because sometimes people say, what age are we in today? And how does it relate to the previous ages? So in our first unit, we talked about the Stone Age. And that's the good old Paleolithic, Neolithic, hunter-gatherers, and then eventually we have the Neolithic Revolution. And then the second age that we move to is the Bronze Age. And the Bronze Age is stuff where they're using, it's named for the materials that they're used in those times. So that's Mesopotamia, Egypt. And then today, we're talking about the Iron Age, which includes the Hebrews, and then the 4 civilizations that we're going to talk about today. The name obviously comes from the material that they're using. Iron is going to be used because it's very useful for weaponry, and you'll see there'll be a militaristic aspect to a lot of these civilizations. So we'll start today. We're going to start with the Hittites, and then from there, we're going to move down to the Phoenicians, who are set along the coast here. And then from there, we're going to talk about the Philistines a bit, and then we are going to finally end up talking about the Lydians, who are in western Anatolia. So that kind of gives you an idea. Now, the Hittites, sorry, it's a bit off here. It's settled in Anatolia. Anatolia is that region. It's modern-day Turkey. Now, I taught you the Hittite. The thing with the Hittites, you want to remember, you're going to think warriors. They are very expert use of the chariots, and they're united under one king and basically ruled very militaristically. While they're in power, they're a very, very strong power. However, they are going to go and have their downfall relatively quickly. Some of their successes include conquering the Babylonian Empire. And one of the most famous things that we'll talk about here is the Battle of Kadesh. Now, what you have in the Battle of Kadesh, you have the Hittites versus the Egyptians. And the Hittites are going and actually going to fight against good old Ramses II is the Egyptian pharaoh, or Ozymandias, who you will know because I remember you know the lovely poem. With this battle is the earliest battle in recorded history for which the tactics, the details that we know about the tactics, formations is known. It's often called the largest chariot battle in the world. 5,000 to 6,000 chariots are going to be used on both sides. There's no consensus about the outcome of what took place. Some views say an Egyptian victory, some say an Egyptian defeat. It's just hard to tell because both of these societies are using kind of propaganda in order to tell this. Now, even more important is what comes 16 years later is the Kadesh Peace Treaty. These former enemies are going to go and make a peace treaty and say, we don't want to fight each other, and we'll go so far as to go and help each other out if each other gets attacked. So if Egypt gets attacked, the Hittites will help them out, and vice versa. It's very similar to something like if you know NATO today or the UN, that type of agreement. It is actually the oldest surviving international treaty. Basically, both sides make a pledge of brotherhood to each other, and it's a sign of mutual alliance. The way they support each other is basically military aid if they're attacked by a third party. How did they meet their downfall? Well, we have these mysterious sea peoples who we really don't know much about, hence the name sea peoples. They come from the sea, and they're going to conquer them, as well as some internal strife in the empire over who's going to be the next king. Some people want one king, some want another. So here's the Hittite Empire at its largest extent there in the white. Very, very large in Anatolia. Anatolia is essentially this region, which I said is like kind of modern-day Turkey. Here's just an idea of that. We have military formations in the Battle of Kadesh, and like I said, 5,000 to 6,000 chariots, pretty big. And here's the what remains of the Kadesh Treaty. Like I said, the world's oldest surviving international treaty. Now the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are an interesting civilization because they accomplished a lot, and they accomplished it in a different way. Not necessarily as militaristic as the Hittites. They're more of an economic powerhouse. They're called the Purple People. And this is not due to the color of the skin. It's due to the purple cloth that they dye from the shell of basically a sea snail, which I'll show you here in a bit. So they're purple cloth that they export. They are people of the sea. They're merchants. They're traders. So like I said, they're an economic powerhouse. And they're going to go, and they're essentially located all along the coast. That's kind of where they go and base everything because they're based on the sea. They're not going to be too far inland. They organize politically as independent city-states, and allowing this allows a lot of local autonomy, a local control. One of the most famous ones is the city of Byblos, which is where a lot of paper comes from. hence the word Bible, which we later get from there, and like if you know bibliography or biblioteca is library in Spanish. Why did they go and use the seas? They tended to use sails on the seas. Rowers were expensive. They would go and hug the coast and come ashore if bad weather occurred. And what they would do for military, the ships were propelled by oarsmen. They would have 2 banks of oars, rows of shield, a bronze ram, a battering ram, and then an armed body of marines, which are essentially pirates. What they would trade ivory, gemstones, myrrh, frankincense, copper, all that type of stuff. Each of the city-states basically kind of did their own thing. In addition, they're colonists, meaning they go and they're going to say, hey, we want to go, we like our Phoenician-ness, but we want to go show it somewhere else. The most famous one is the Carthage, which is in northern Africa, which will come into play later when we talk about the Carthaginians in the Punic Wars versus the Romans, because they're going to be descended from them. So we'll leave that there. They basically went and established themselves all over the seas. There's evidence, too, that they went around the tip of Africa way before. We're talking 2,000 years before the Europeans. In addition, they also spread wine culture, and the idea of that's later incorporated by the Romans and Greeks of wine. The Phoenicians essentially started that. They used the site of mountains, ideal for grape growing, and they also used the Canaanite jars, which I'll show you here in a bit. In addition, they used created the alphabet, which is where we get the word phonics, if you ever heard, like maybe as a kid in kindergarten, your teacher puts up the letter C and you go, you make the C sound. That comes from the word of the alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet, which later becomes incorporated as the Greek letters, which later become our Roman letters. So I'll show you a picture here, and you'll see the connection. It's basically a standard form of an alphabet. So here they are going all around the Mediterranean. Like you can see here, they hug the coast and tend to go and create their different colonies. And there's the Carthage colony in northern Africa. There's the Murex shell. Ooh, beautiful purple, hence the name Purple People. And here are the Canaanite jars, which is where they put the wine inside. This is likely the type of jar when Jesus is going and transforming the water into wine. And that story of doing that is probably a jar similar to this. Here's the Phoenician alphabet. You got to use a bit of imagination, but you have to think it's twice removed. You go and then you have Greece, and then after that you have the Roman alphabet, which we have those letters. So the idea here is that we have our roots in the Phoenician alphabet. Now talk about the Philistines, and the reason I call them the Philistines is they're very, very famous Philistine. The most famous one is a very tall dude you may know. His name is Goliath, who we talked about last time, David and Goliath. So you need to know that Goliath is a Philistine, and he's kind of tall, like Mr. Phil Jackson. Their region that they're going to dominate, it's a little bit south of Phoenicia. You did on your map. It's about 1,000 to 1,100 BC. Actually, I'm going backwards in the year, but you get the idea, or BCE. Despite the fact that you may think they're a military powerhouse, they are in some respects, but they are mostly a peaceful civilization. We don't know a lot about the Philistines because we really don't have a form of writing for them that we can read. So we know about them from the other people, which makes our historical sources a bit biased. So here are the different parts. Here's the divided kingdom from last time, the north and the south, and then the Philistine states there, and then up here we have the Phoenician states, and then over up and to the left, if you think about it, that's where the Lydians and the Hittites will be as well. So we'll talk about Lydians. When you think about Lydians, you want to think about bling bling, money, stuff. Now, they're going to settle in western Anatolia, a little bit west to the Hittites. And we talked about in class what gives money its value, and the idea of having a currency established by government is going to be started by the Lydians. Essentially, before they had mixed gold and silver together, and there's a lot of chemical reactions that went on there, and they need to make a pure currency made out of a pure chemical, only silver, only gold. And King Croesus is going to be the guy who does this. It's basically going to be a standard form of government currency, and like one example that I talked about was, depending upon the size of the currency and its wealth, it would have a different part of a lion. So like a full picture of a lion on the currency would be a larger denomination versus if it just had a little like lion paw, that meant it was a little bit smaller money. So they invent coinage, which is huge because buy barter, barter is going to go disappear, and the modern form of coinage, of currency created by government is going to go and begin to take place. Now, the legend of King Midas, or the Greek myth of King Midas, is essentially a king who went, and obviously it's a myth, but everything he touched turned to gold. And the idea here is that Croesus, who was a real guy, went and was able to go and very, very wealthy. And that's where they get the phrase rich as Croesus. It's like saying rich as Bill Gates. Croesus is also known for having his wild parties. I talked about basically people going and taking gold from his palace on the way out. There's a story of a guy actually going and rubbing oil all over his body and then rolling around naked and picking up gold dust. Also, people leaving his parties and just stuffing their pockets full of gold. So he's a super duper wealthy guy. So there you have it, the civilizations of the Hittites, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, and the Lydians.